Sarah Nguyen is a first-generation Vietnamese-American activist and entrepreneur. She's on a mission to change the future of specialty coffee. Just going back to your background, in addition to be a journalist, you majored in ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. You studied with the historian Ron Takaki. And then you went on to produce content for NBC Asian America. She's opening eyes. One cup of coffee at a time. Take a look at this. I started noticing Vietnamese iced coffee popping up as a trend on a lot of cafe menus around 2016. And this was also around the time of like Vietnamese food and culture was having a really big moment in mainstream America. We're seeing the emergence of like so many more first generation owned and operated Vietnamese restaurants, right? So we're definitely seeing this cultural wave grow quickly around 2016. However, every time I would order the beet meats iced coffee at one of the specialty cafes, they were never using actual Vietnamese coffee beans, and I knew this because I would ask the barista, what's in this drink, and they'd say, oh, it's our house Brazilian or house Ethiopian, and we add sweetened dense milk to it. So I thought that was really interesting and problematic for many reasons. One, when we do that, we're rendering them actual producers invisible. You know, whether they're Ethiopian producers or Brazilian producers, why can't we just call it Ethiopian coffee and between condensed milk, right? In an industry that prioritizes transparency, right? You think that that's what they would do to give credit to where it's due. I was so blown away to learn that Vietnam is actually the second largest producer of coffee in the world, right? And I didn't know this. And I feel like most people have spoken to since we're also like, I didn't know that, right? And I was like, wow, how do I not know this as a Vietnamese person? Right, as you being as American in this will let me to feel like, oh, because of lack of transparency and lack of visibility and lack of representation. Because instead of like for some parts of the world, people can say, oh, this is a Colombian coffee. But for some reason that value of transparency is not being applied to Southeast Asia as a region or Vietnam as a region, right? So there's a huge level of hypocrisy happening here of like who we determine is deserving of that value of transparency. So, lack of transparency, lack of visibility, lack of representation, these are all things that I felt in my life as an individual growing up, right? And so even though Vietnam is a major contributor to coffee experiences around the world, Vietnam has essentially been rendered invisible in the global coffee conversation, where we are not calling out this is a product or this product contains coffee beans from Vietnam. It's simply coffee, right? So it was such a then when I was kind of like working through all these realizations, I was like, wow, this is such a missed opportunity for culture connection and appreciation, and more than anything for people at the end of the supply chain to have opportunity to elevate, have agency, have respect and recognition, and to have a chance to advance their livelihoods. Right. The coffee industry has developed this narrative that Arabica beans are superior and Robusta beans are inferior, which is simply not true, because what makes it great, what makes it superior or inferior or good coffee or bad coffee is not inherent to the qualities of the bean. It's dependent on the production of the coffee, right? And so even though Arabica has been hailed as like the specialty coffee variety, there's also poorly grown Arabic around the world, right? And so this level of care that we've seen through especially coffee industry to elevate Arabica varieties around the world was not being offered to Robusta beans, but more specifically to robust to farming communities. Part of our mission is to break down this really elitist culture of coffee which says this is good and this is bad coffee. For me, when I build my business, especially in the very beginning, I didn't have the blueprint, I didn't have an entire world map, I had no idea what it looks like, honestly, but I just stayed really focused on what is the next step you need to achieve to get yourself to that next step, right? And that's how I approach building Business, I feel like sometimes we can get overwhelmed when we're like, I don't know the whole picture, I don't have the whole plan, I've always entered on you. No. A project or a business without having the whole plan, and I think that's really key to getting started and really key to figuring things out. So just like a puzzle, like I always look for like that next puzzle piece that I needed to just capture and lay down, and once I picked it up and I laid it down, I connected it to what I was doing, and I figured out what the next piece of the puzzle I needed was. Then I would move on to that next piece. Right, and so that's how I've approached building the business, from going from idea to action. And so, to be more specific, I have this idea and I was like, well, what is the very first thing I need? I was like, I need to see if I can actually import coffee beans, right? I need to see if I can develop a direct trade relationship with a producer, and so I went to Vietnam and I visited my family, and I asked my family, does anybody know anybody? And they're like, we do. And like, they helped me strike up that first relationship. The next question was like, well, how do I bring coffee beans? Here I start asking Google, how do you bring coffee beans to United States? How do you import? And then Google tells you, well, you need this, you need registered FDA, you need a customs broker, you need a freight forwarder. And then I'm like, what is a freight forwarder? And then you Google a freight forwarder, right? That's literally how I built the business. I just asked a lot of questions. I asked Google a lot. I focused on finding one piece of the puzzle at a time. Once I found that piece, I'd lay it down and look for that next piece until eventually I had my first pallet here, I had my bags here, I had everything ready to go. I had a website up, I had photos, and then I had a lunch party. I did lots of random gigs, whether it was freelancing as a writing counselor for college essays, copywriting, around writing articles. I did some hospitality work. I was just like classic, brand new to New York, doing a million jobs. I actually interned for, at a place in New York City in the beginning, for free, for no pay, just to kind of build my network and meet people. And after doing that for about 6 months, I eventually started getting freelance gigs. They're all very, very small. I also worked. I've worked in the service industry since I was in high school as a server and a host, so I also did that on the side during those first few years post-college, where I was working for another company full-time. I really built a structure around my work life where I could dedicate my time off the clock to building my creative career. So as soon as I was like, quote unquote, off the clock at 5 p.m. at my daytime job or whatever, I go straight into developing my creative projects. So my creative projects included, writing poetry, or making chat books, or making digital content, or making new websites. Like, I really treated my creative career during those years as like my second job, at just as if anyone would have like a double shift. I think for people who, want to have a creative side hustle, or they want to transition from like their day job to like a full-time creative career, just having the disciplines and building out like, what does that transitional period look like? Some of the lessons I learned from my first restaurant business was to get really clear on why you're doing something, was to get really clear on what you're doing and why you're doing something. And when it's no longer working, we have to reevaluate, right? I think there were lots of moments in my restaurant journey where things weren't really working, and I felt like I didn't want to let it go. Have really clear boundaries with the people that you work with, especially if they're your business partners, right? In small businesses, we tend to have really intimate relationships, and we're really in a lot of like the trenches together. However, remember why you're in a relationship in the first place, which is the business. So it's really important to put the needs of the business first, to not take things personally. I had that business in my 20s. I'm a very different person now. I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I think when things don't go, the way I wanted them to, the way I expected them to, I would often take it personally and This relates to what I was just saying. And like in business, it's never personal. Right, in business it's always about what is the best thing for the greater collective here, which is everyone involved in the business, not just one. Individuals, like being in my 20s. Especially the part when I was in New York City and I was freelancing in New York has like such this like energy of like, yeah, we're all out here hustling, we're all trying to make it right. I was like really engulfed in the energy a lot. I think I felt like I felt like I was rushing a lot in my 20s, like rushing to make it, or like rushing to prove something of myself, or rushing to have something to show for myself, right? So if I could piece of advice I give my 20-year-old self is, don't be in a rush, enjoy the journey, enjoy the process, enjoy everything you're going through. Because it goes by really quickly, right? And then it gets a lot harder, so yeah, that's what I'd say, don't be in a rush. You